Bienvenidos Radio Escuchas. Estamos aquí en su programa Informe KBBF. Como han escuchado en los anuncios, tenemos un programa muy especial hoy. Estamos hablando con la familia Roth. El hijo de la familia Roth, Branch Roth, perdió su vida a las manos del Departamento de Policía de Rohnert Park en el 2017, y estamos aquí con sus padres y también con otros invitados. Primeramente, les voy a decir que el programa va a ser bilingüe, ya que la familia Roth prefiere hablar en inglés. Yo me voy a tratar de interpretar yo solo, espero que pueda, pero también tenemos los servicios voluntarios de la profesora Laura Larqué. Muchas gracias, profesora, para ayudarnos a interpretar a la familia.
Muchas gracias por incluirme y pues aquí para servir a la familia y a la comunidad y a nuestra estación de radio KBBF.
I was just explaining in Spanish that we're going to be having a bilingual interview. I will be translating for myself, and Professor Larqué will be translating for our guests. Primeramente tenemos en el estudio a Marnie Roth, que es la madre de Branch Roth. También tenemos a su padre Chris Roth. Tenemos a Susan Lamont, que es una activista local. Y tenemos al abogado de la familia, Isaac Schweger. Welcome everybody, bienvenidos. Primeramente, en las noticias quizá hayan visto que recientemente la familia Roth ganó una demanda en contra de el Departamento de Policía de Rohnert Park por un total de $4 millones por la muerte de su hijo a las manos de la policía. So, first of all, I just wanted to say, mention, you may have seen the news recently that the Roth family won a settlement against the Rohnert Park Police Department for the wrongful death of their son. So, para empezar, quisiera saber cómo empezó esto. ¿Qué es exactamente la situación que resultó en la muerte de Branch? And I don't know who's best to answer this. Maybe Isaac. I'm not sure. Let's begin with what were the circumstances that led to the eventual death of Branch?
Well, it's obviously a story that could take a really long time to tell, but I think the story for your listeners is that Branch was contacted by members of the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety while he was staying at a hotel. He was under the influence at the time, and he was unable to respond quickly to what the officers were asking him to do. So the officers resorted to using force against him, and ultimately that force, coupled with the lack of training that the department had received on how to deal with these kind of situations, led to Branch's death. It was a totally avoidable death.
Let's do some translating real quick.
Como escucharon, Edgar le preguntó a la familia, a la amiga y al abogado que nos dijeran por favor cómo empezó todo desde un principio, y el señor abogado dijo que acerca de la muerte del joven, y dijo que se llevaría mucho tiempo de explicar, pero que él se encontraba en un hotel y que la policía se comunicó con él porque en ese momento pues se encontraba bajo la influencia. No nos explicó de qué clase de droga, pero que como no le estaba respondiendo rápidamente a la policía se exasperó y bueno, pues murió en las manos de la policía, y dice el abogado que fue una muerte injusta que se pudo haber evitado.
Would you like, so obviously you just finished by saying it was an unavoidable death. What is their argument for their supposed required use of force? Le estoy preguntando, acabó por decir que era una muerte que no tenía que pasar. ¿Cuál es el argumento que usa la policía que según tenían que hacer lo que hicieron?
So it was an entirely avoidable death. It didn't have to happen.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. That's what I meant to say.
That's understood. And in fact, the coroner deemed that the death was a homicide. Now, legally, what a homicide is when one person kills another, or in this case, when 5 people killed another. So legally, that's what it was deemed. Nevertheless, the district attorney, Jill Ravitch, decided that there was no criminal liability on behalf of the officers. That is to say, no crime had been committed.
Edgar escucharon la pregunta de Edgar y que cómo es que se murió el joven, y el abogado reforzó su ponencia de decir que legalmente esto hubiera sido considerado un homicidio, pero ya como el joven murió en manos de la policía, pues el abogado del distrito, Joel Rutledge, dijo que no se había cometido crimen alguno.
But of course, Jill Ravitch has never seen an officer-involved killing that she didn't like. And that started, of course, with her review and approval of the actions of the officers involved in Andy Lopez's death, and it's carried through to every death in this county at the hands of law enforcement. So we were not surprised. In fact, I told Chris and Marnie, as that investigation was pending, you know where this is going. And of course we all did, and that's exactly where we ended up, with Jill Ravitch saying that the officers did nothing wrong. But the investigation was flawed, and it was incomplete, and that's of course entirely what we expect from that administration.
Marnie, I saw that you wanted to say something. We're going to do that translation and then go to you. We're going to translate his words and then go to you after. Just so you know.
El abogado sigue insistiendo de que desgraciadamente la señora que es la abogada del distrito dijo que esto no había sido un crimen, y el abogado se refiere a que la abogada del distrito nunca ha visto que alguien muera en las manos de la policía, y usó como ejemplo.
I just want to clarify, Jill Ravitch has never in her career put blame on a police officer for a killing.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Y Edgar le preguntó que para reforzar lo que se está diciendo, que si la policía nunca ha visto, la abogada del distrito nunca había visto que la policía matara a alguien o que haya encontrado a algún policía culpable.
Yeah.
Y el abogado usó lo que le pasó a Andy García hace años. Andy López, que todo lo que pasó con Andy López, que no se le encontró culpables a los policías.
En toda su carrera, Joe Ravitch nunca ha puesto culpa en un policía por una muerte. Marnie, did you want to say something? Sorry, I thought I saw you raise your hand like you wanted to say something.
Sorry, I was waving goodbye to somebody.
Oh, my bad. Cool. Me equivoqué, pensé que la señora quería decir algo, pero no. So, as we're used to seeing in these cases, some kind of internal investigation happens on the part of not only police departments, but the county and the county legal system. And as we're used to seeing, they are always exonerated. So as you could predict, as you told the family, so what was the next step after that, after they've made that decision? Le estoy preguntando, como muchos de nosotros ya sabemos, cada vez que esto pasa, no nada más los departamentos de la policía, pero también los abogados del condado siempre deciden que no hubo ninguna culpa en estas muertes. Entonces, cuando ustedes, y no solamente eso, pero el abogado supo, les dijo a la familia que ya sabía que iba a pasar. Entonces, ¿cuál es el siguiente paso cuando una familia pasa de esto y cuando dicen que no es culpa de nadie? ¿Cuál es el siguiente paso?
So I'll start by first saying that the department did not do an internal affairs investigation. They've intentionally not done one so that they can say that they didn't actually approve the actions of the officers. And here we are, we're getting on 2.5 years after Chris and Marnie's son passed away. And at trial, the chief of police, a man by the name of Tim Matos, testified that he had still not concluded his review because he was waiting to hear what the jury said. And interesting, I think that statement really empowered the jury to deliver a message to the Director of Public Safety and to the politicians at the City of Rohnert Park, and that is, you've heard from us now. Now it's your job to decide what you're going to do differently. As far as we know, they're still doing business as usual. They haven't changed a thing.
El abogado Isaac Schwalger explicó muy claramente que cuál es el paso a seguir después de que el abogado del distrito dice no hubo un crimen, y dice que quizás hasta a propósito no hicieron una investigación interna, porque si hacen una investigación interna tienen que declarar, tienen que ver, tienen que saber todo lo que pasó, y después de 2 años y medio no se ha hecho la investigación interna, porque entonces cuando lo lleven con el jurado, cuando se lleve a juicio, todo eso tiene que salir a la luz.
And then you had asked about what comes next. And to be sure, this lawsuit was filed even before the district attorney concluded her investigation. And I think, before we started the show, you had mentioned wanting to discuss a little bit about the timeline of how something like this progresses. And to the average person, hearing that it takes 2 years to put a trial like this in front of a jury, it just seems incredibly slow. But the reality is that in this case, things moved very fast.
Wow.
A different case could have taken 3, 4, even 5 years before it would have got to the jury. I think that
as we saw with Andy Lopez.
Yes. Well, Andy's case never got to a jury.
Right.
That resulted, of course, in a settlement. It did take 5 years, but it was a settlement. Whereas in this case, we were unable to reach a settlement agreement with the City of Rohnert Park, and that's why we had to go to a trial and had to give it to a jury to decide. And so this was a verdict, and that's pretty rare in a civil rights case. Most of these will either be dismissed, they will settle, or the plaintiffs go to trial and lose. Frankly, it's a very difficult road to travel, but in this case, we proved that you can stand up against the police, against the powerful, and you can win.
El abogado estaba explicando que, porque Edgar, como escucharon, le preguntó cuál era el paso a seguir. Entonces dice que antes de que la abogada del distrito terminara con la investigación externa, ya los padres del muchacho y el abogado habían metido la demanda. Y la gente se preguntará que es un proceso lento, y en realidad sí es lento, se lleva 2 años, y no es nada más la burocracia, sino que tiene que intervenir toda la investigación, pero en este caso fue muy rápido. En primera, no hubo un arreglo fuera de la corte por parte de los padres y por parte de la policía, y entonces se fueron a la demanda. El veredicto, que fue cosa sorprendente, fue a favor de los padres de el joven que fue asesinado por la policía, y el abogado explicó que en un caso de demanda de los derechos civiles esto es muy raro, porque regularmente nunca dan un veredicto a favor del demandante, y pero que ellos fueron capaces de pararse fuertes en contra de la abogada del distrito, del juez, de toda la burocracia que existe en este país, y ganaron esta lucha.
What were the I know this is kind of the difficult part to talk about, but what were the specific accusations and demands that were filed, and what was the response to them from the police department? Estoy preguntando, esta parte quizás es poquito difícil de hablar, pero ¿cuáles fueron los argumentos y demandas y exijos que hicieron de parte de la demanda en contra del policía y cuál fue la respuesta de los policías a esos argumentos?
Well, the law recognizes the right of parents and children to associate with each other. And so in this case, we alleged that the actions of these officers deprived Chris and Marnie of their rights to associate with their son. And the reason that was actionable, that we could sue, was because the driving force behind that was the police department's failure to train its officers in a phenomenon that is called positional asphyxiation. Positional asphyxiation is what happened to Branch, and it happens a lot in police encounters when officers put a person in a position so that they can't breathe. And here, that's what occurred. And as a result, Branch died. And of course, when we looked into it, we found that this police department had provided no training to their officers whatsoever in positional asphyxiation, except for training them that it didn't exist. They had specifically trained them that there was no evidence to show that this was a life-compromising situation. And that's totally contrary to all of the evidence that's out there and how other police departments train their people.
Quizás lo que van a escuchar sea un poco duro y les recomendamos que si tienen a niños escuchando este programa, mejor se los lleven a otra habitación.
Giving a little bit of a trigger warning.
¿Qué?
Giving a little bit of a trigger warning for violence.
Está bien, sí, porque, bueno, hay mucha violencia, pero el abogado explicó que tenían acusaciones específicas y cuáles eran las respuestas por parte de la ley, y dice que la ley reconoce que todos los familiares tienen derecho de estar juntos y que desgraciadamente en esta situación los que son supuestamente los que acarrean la ley le previnieron a los padres del joven Branch estar juntos entre ellos, y la manera en que lo trataron, lo maltrataron y lo ultrajaron. Desgraciadamente el joven se asfixió y que esta muerte podía haber sido evitada debido a que los policías no tenían ningún entrenamiento para prevenir eso y se estaban indiferentes o no sabían darse cuenta de que el joven Branch estaba asfixiándose, y eso comprometió su manera de respirar y últimamente llegó a su muerte.
Y el departamento de policía no nada más tienen falta de entrenamiento, pero ellos argumentan que el asfixio dependiendo de la posición de la policía, física de la policía ante el cuerpo de otra persona no existe, y eso fue exactamente lo que causó la muerte. Fue voy a preguntarle específicamente, when you say positional asphyxiation, what was the police officer doing? Because we've heard, for example, on TV and in the media, we've heard, for example, Eric Garner, a famous case of a similar situation. Was it a situation like that?
It was. And in this case, I would say it was a little bit more outrageous. Because this wasn't one officer, it wasn't two officers, these were 5 officers. And Branch was, he was brutalized. He was attacked violently prior to the asphyxiation occurring. And that kind of helps understand the mentality of the officers going into this scene. They had punched him and kneed him and elbowed him, broken at least one bone, hit him with a flashlight 3 times, tasered him 6 times. This is the Department of Public Safety. And they put him on the ground, and then they knelt on his back.
Okay.
And having him face down on the ground while a number of officers applied their body weight to his back. And then he says, audibly, I can't breathe.
Because there's video evidence.
There's video evidence. He called for help 45 times. He said, "Help, help me, help." Called for help 45 times. And as his life escaped his body, he said some of his last words. He said, "I can't breathe." And the officer's response was, "You can breathe." And they didn't move. And there on film, that's what the jury saw. That's what Susan saw. More times than probably she would have liked. We saw Chris and Marnie's son die. An entirely avoidable death at the hands of these monsters, really.
Como escucharon, Edgar le pidió al abogado que explicara de manera más detallada cómo es que se murió, porque el abogado usó un lenguaje que se usa en la corte que se llama posición de asfixia. Y le hizo comparación con otra persona que fue pues asesinada por otros policías, y el abogado dijo que la asfixia de Branch fue todavía más fea, porque en otras ocasiones es nada más 1 o 2 policías. En este caso eran 5 policías los que empezaron a atacar al joven. Se le echaron encima, le pegaron brutalmente con sus manos, con todo lo que traían, con sus lámparas de mano, le dieron el taser, eso que los pone a dormir, y lo tiraron al suelo. Ya estando el joven en el suelo, lo pusieron boca abajo, y todos le tomaron turnos pegándole con las rodillas en la espalda, y les dijo muchas veces que no podía respirar, y con un cinismo los policías le decían que sí podía respirar, que no se hiciera el menso prácticamente, hasta que dejó de respirar. Y bueno, desgraciadamente para los padres, pero de una manera también afortunadamente, pudieron ver todo como pasó en un videotape.
Para aclarar, el video se hizo disponible durante la corte, pero la familia Roth escogió salir de la sala durante el tiempo que estaba pasando la grabación, porque ellos personalmente no la querían ver, que es algo que podemos entender. Susan y Isaac sí vieron el video, pero la familia Roth escogió no ver el video. I was just explaining that, to clarify, the Roth family chose not to see the video, although it was available for the jury and for Susan and Isaac. Algo que es interesante es que la familia y Isaac decidieron empezar la demanda antes de que se hiciera cualquier decisión, porque ellos sabían que iba a pasar. It was interesting that you said you decided to move ahead before any decisions were announced on behalf of the attorney's office or the police department. So how long did this process take, and what did it consist of for people out there who don't know the process and who don't understand the bureaucracy and kind of the general concepts? You know, maybe can you name a couple of the major steps that are required to get something like this to happen? Si nos puede dar un ejemplo de cuáles son los pasos mayores, de qué se tiene que hacer para que algo como esto tenga éxito.
Well, the first step is that you file a lawsuit, and the 2 places that you can do that are in the county where the event occurred or in a federal court. Now, we all know that law enforcement in Sonoma County has a home court advantage here, and the likelihood of prevailing in the legal system locally is less than prevailing in the legal system in a federal court. One of the reasons for that is it's a small town. The other reason for that is juries are less likely to award significant sums of money if they think it's coming out of their own tax base. And so getting out of town was helpful. So the first step was to file the lawsuit and decide where we would bring it. The difficulty in that is that at the beginning you have almost no information, and that's by design. Law enforcement keeps all of the information hush-hush. You're not allowed access to anything. They say, we're still working on our investigation, so you can't know. And there might be some good reasons for that, or at least maybe there were at one point in the past, but now that delay is just used to stop people from getting into courts. So you have to proceed with imperfect information. So you take what you have and what you know, and you file a lawsuit and hope that it's enough, and then you wait for the facts to come in. That's the first step.
Yeah.
El abogado estaba explicando que antes de que hubiera una declaración por parte de la abogada del distrito de cómo habían pasado las cosas, qué es lo que había pasado, la familia y el abogado decidieron llevar la demanda a cabo antes ni siquiera de tener unas verdades concretas. Dijo que tenían que decidir dónde se iba a meter la demanda, si en la Corte del Condado o en la Corte Federal. Si la meten en la Corte del Condado, es muy difícil ganar porque no nada más el condado es pequeño, pero entre todos se conocen y muchas veces la gente que escogen del jurado no quieren reconocer que la familia tiene derechos porque tienen miedo de que si se da cualquier cantidad o reconocimiento vaya a salir de los impuestos. Entonces estuvieron preguntando dónde vamos a meter la demanda. No nos dijo todavía si fue en el condado o en la Corte Federal, pero dijo que aún a pesar de que no tenían información, ellos decidieron meter la demanda por la simple y sencilla razón de que el gobierno, la Corte del Condado, los que están trabajando con todo eso que es la policía, los abogados del gobierno, muchas veces esconden la información con la excusa de seguimos con la investigación, no tardan en dar la información, muchas veces a propósito para que la gente se frustre y no siga con esta demanda, ya que pues no quieren decir las verdades de todo lo que ocurrió con el asesinato del joven.
Just to clarify, where did you decide to file the lawsuit?
In federal court.
In federal court. Decidieron poner la demanda en la Corte Federal.
En la Corte Federal.
So, I assume that this requires a lot of research, investigation, and what was the process like in trying to get information, and what was the response that you got from them, if any?
Well, what we knew to begin with was only what we could glean from the contacts that Chris and Marnie and their family had with law enforcement, with the press release from the sheriff's office, the original reporting on the case. But then I think probably just as important as that, if not more so, was that Chris sent a request in for public records to be released. And there were a few public records that he received in that process that were instrumental in us filing a case. But at the beginning of the lawsuit, we only knew 2 officers were involved. We didn't know there were 5 because all that was kept back. Usually when these events happen, the officers are placed on administrative leave or paid vacation, as people like to say, while the critical incident is investigated. Here, nobody was. So there wasn't even a report of anyone being put out on leave for us to know who is involved. And again, a lot of this was just designed to keep the information from us so that we would be less able to efficiently proceed with the lawsuit.
I just wanted to clarify real quick. If you're listening at home, you may be hearing some technical issues. We're asking you that you just, for now, kind of put up with us. As long as you can hear the information, that's what matters. Estoy avisando a los radios escuchas si escuchan un problema técnico que por favor nos disculpe y si pueden escuchar la información es lo que es importante.
El proceso, nos explicaba el abogado, que es no nada más lento, pero tienen que trabajar prácticamente a oscuras, porque volvió a reiterar que la policía, a propósito, sellan toda la información y no se las dan ni a la familia ni al abogado. Pero Chris, que es el padre, pidió que se publicaran todos los records de su hijo, qué es lo que había pasado, y dijo que al principio ellos pensaban que nada más había 2 policías atacando a su hijo, no 5. Número 1, no les daban toda esa información. Número 2, cuando estas situaciones pasan, los policías que participan en esta homicidio, los ponen en descanso forzado, les dan descanso con sueldo o los obligan a tomar vacaciones, y en esta situación ninguno de los policías tenía ni un descanso forzado, todos seguían trabajando como si no hubiera pasado nada. Y dice que desgraciadamente toda esta burocracia por parte de la policía y de la corte está diseñada para poner un alto al proceso o hacerlo todavía más burocrático, más lento.
Me parece ser de lo que acaba de decir usted. Yo tengo la opinión de que parece que lo que querían es pretender que nada pasó, que nunca pasó. It sounds to me from what you said, what I can put together, I have no choice but to believe like what they were trying to do was pretend it never happened so they could just move along. You know, everything from not making a big deal out of the officers' disciplinary in terms of discipline to, not releasing any records until they were forced to. It kind of sounds like they were hoping it would just disappear.
Of course they were. Of course they were. These people are not concerned with doing the right thing. That's not their job. They're not concerned with keeping people like Branch Roth safe. This is not their job. These people are concerned with looking out for themselves and covering for their buddy and making sure they don't lose money and they don't lose face. It's horrible that it has come to this, but Branch's case is representative of, I think, a change. I don't even know if change is the right word. It is representative of where we are right now as a country and the dichotomy between regular people, the public, and law enforcement generally. It really is. It's an us versus them. Mm-hmm. It's a win at all costs. It's an army of occupation kind of mentality. And people have to stand up for themselves. They have to stand up for their families. They have to fight back when these things happen, because left to their own devices, the politicians, the powerful, the police chiefs, the cops, they're only going to cover for each other. Mm-hmm. You're never going to see justice in this unless you fight. And if Chris and Marnie had waited for them to say, this is what happened, and we're so sorry, and this is what we're going to do better, if they had waited for that day never would have come. So they didn't wait. We didn't wait. We pursued this. It was a righteous fight. They were in it for the long haul. We talked about that at the beginning. This is going to take a long time. And there's no guarantees where it's going to go. But there's value in just standing up for your family, if nothing else. But here, we got to have more than that. It was a very difficult and challenging case, but it was important to bring, and in the end, there was accountability, and that's what we were all after.
Yep.
Como escucharon, Edgar le preguntó una vez más al abogado que si, como él lo entendía, fue una cosa que pretendían, que no fue un homicidio o se estaban haciendo. Y el abogado contestó que el momento en que reconozcan que fue un homicidio, tienen que tomar las medidas prudentes. Y esto es una dicotomía, explicó, cómo es que esto trabaja. Entre los policías, entre los detectives, todos los que trabajan en la corte, se cuidan entre ellos mismos. Tienen que callarse lo que pasó y pretender que no fue un accidente o que no fue un homicidio, que el muchacho se murió por morirse. Y dijo que los políticos, los policías, todos los que trabajan en este ambiente se cubren entre ellos mismos. Los políticos no van a estar sacando al aire lo que los policías hacen, y los policías pues se pretenden que nada pasó, pero como los padres de este joven empezaron a demandar sus derechos, se les pararon y les dijeron que tenían que hacer una investigación, y dijo que debido a eso la corte había seguido el caso, bueno, de una manera exitosa, porque en esta situación los valores familiares fueron los que ganaron.
Una pregunta más, porque sabemos que se tiene que ir a hacer sus otros compromisos el abogado. One more question. I know that you have to go. My question is, what we normally see in these cases is that the officers responsible and their organizations that employ them in the county and everybody, they manage to avoid admitting guilt in the form of a settlement or something like that. Was this an example of that as well? Lo que le pregunté es, lo que vemos normalmente en estos casos es que el último resultado siempre resulta que de un modo u otro los policías pueden decir que legalmente no pueden decir nunca que ellos tuvieron culpa de algo, y en lugar de eso se paga un dinero o una demanda. Was this the case here, or what was the case here?
So any settlement of any lawsuit is going to involve no party admitting wrongdoing. That's just standard. And after the jury returned its verdict here, that's what we heard from the city of Rohnert Park too. They got it wrong. The judge got it wrong. The jury got it wrong. We're going to appeal. There are some human beings on this planet that are incapable of admitting when they have made a mistake. Those people should not be in public office. They need to be run out.
Yep.
And when people like the city manager, when people like the elected officials in Rohnert Park make statements like that, it shows they need to go. They're incapable of recognizing when they have made a mistake, even when it has cost a man his life, even when it has cost a family their son. Those are not public servants. Those are truly enemies of the people, and they need to be treated like such. Some people can't admit when they're wrong. They want to fight no matter what. Those are not the people that should be working for the public. Rohnert Park deserves better. Sonoma County deserves better. My clients deserve better. And it took this jury telling them they were wrong because they were incapable of understanding that themselves.
Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Hopefully we'll stay in touch for more things like this. Muchas gracias, el abogado Schweger, por su tiempo.
Voy a terminar de traducir lo que el abogado acaba de decir, y en verdad que ya se va, pero tiene una valentía increíble de parársele a todos los que están en el poder. Dijo que cuando se arregla una demanda, ninguna de las dos partes del juicio tiene que reconocer que hubo algo ilegal, y que por eso se tuvieron que ir a la demanda hasta el final. Y dijo que desgraciadamente muchos de los que participaron en el asesinato de este joven no quisieron reconocer sus errores, y que esta gente no debería de estar en el servicio público, porque si no pueden reconocer sus errores van a mentir, van a pelear hasta el final. Y que la gente que vive en Rohnert Park, en Sonoma, en el condado de Sonoma en general, tienen que estar conscientes de que esta gente que está en el servicio público son muy mentirosos. Tuvo que llegar el jurado, que fue compuesto afortunadamente por gente honesta, a decirles que estaban mintiendo y que no deberían de hacer eso.
Well, muchas gracias al abogado. Vamos a hablar con la familia Roth. So I have a question. I guess this is for the people out there who are not familiar with this story. You have not even heard half of it. It gets a lot more intense, because something you may not even realize. Well, here I'll just open with this. What happened in January 2013? Estoy preguntando a la familia que esta historia, para que no nos conozcan, esta historia es mucho más grande que esto, y les pregunté qué es lo que pasó. Ellos nos van a explicar en enero de 2013.
Hi, this is Chris, Branch's father, and I just will try to give a bit of a narrative on that. January 1st, 2013, my son Isa was brutalized by the correctional officers in Sonoma County Jail. For 28 minutes, he was held to the ground, tasered multiple times, beaten, and so forth. And anyway, to make a long story short, that was all totally wrong, police brutality. And I want to mention also, we only knew Isaac as a result of more police brutality because Isaac was the attorney for Ramon Cairo, who was arrested as part of the demonstrations against the murder of Andy Lopez by Eric Gelhaus. So because of our involvement with the people protesting that murder by Eric Gelhaus, for that reason we knew Isaac, who defended Ramon Cairo, was one of the leaders in Justice Coalition for Andy Lopez, and got Ramon acquitted. So I just want to say quickly, get involved with your community. It's really a great thing to have support.
So, sorry, really quick. So for people who are not familiar and do not catch that, this is another son of yours.
Right.
This is obviously, this is not Branch. This
Branch's
is
brother.
Isa, who is still with us, but in January 2013 was in a very public case as well because it was on the internet. Was held down and tased 23 times. Okay, nada más quería aclarar eso para usted.
Ok. Nos estaba platicando el papá del joven que el 1 de enero del... No, el 13 de...
No, el 2013, 1 de enero de 2013.
El 1 de enero del 2013, su hijo Isa fue brutalizado por la policía. Y afortunadamente llegaron a conocer al abogado porque el abogado estuvo defendiendo a muchos de los protestantes que participaron en las manifestaciones por la muerte injusta de Andy López. Así es como se pusieron en contacto. Pero fue como se contactaron con el abogado después de que su hijo fue brutalizado por la policía, Branch. Su hijo Branch.
No.
¿No?
Eso es lo importante. Okay. Isa fue el incidente de Isa fue en el 2013. El incidente de Branch, que es el otro hijo de la familia,
fue en el 2017.
Okay. Entonces esta familia ha sufrido 2 incidentes de violencia policíaca. La primera siendo su otro hijo, el quien fue electrocutado por la pistola eléctrica 23 veces. So this incident was famously on video. Did Isaac create that video?
Actually, it's kind of ironic because the police are not real bright, and they actually wanted to use the video to defend themselves. But what they were doing was beating a handcuffed man who was prone on the floor, beating and tasering him for 28 minutes. For some reason, they thought that video would show their innocence. There's not much I can say about that. That's incomprehensible. So that was how the video...
Yeah, and the video got out and kind of went viral.
Isaac let the video go up on YouTube, and it became a viral video, and they decided then that maybe they should address the issue, which they didn't want to address until then.
Yeah.
Okay, quiero aclarar. El video cassette que salió en el aire, que la policía usó para defenderse creyendo que todo iba a estar bien, demuestra cómo le pegaron, electrocutaron y abusaron por el joven 24 minutos. Pero este era Isa o era Branch. Isa,
2013,
okay.
Sí.
Y luego Isa subió a la internet todo este video y los policías dijeron no, esto está yéndose por el lado malo.
Y tuvieron que hacer algo.
Vale.
I just want to add to that. as an example of what you've been talking about a system that blocks you every way, every step of the way. Isa had a right to that video, and he could never get a copy of it through his public defender, and he had more than one public defender or pretender, and he tried to get this video. At one point, a public defender had said to him, well, I'll let you see this, but you can't, release this at all. And he said, okay. Well, when he finally got Isaac, he met with Isaac, and Isaac said, I'll take a look at this. I'll get it, and I'll take a look at it. That was when everything really broke loose, and they realized this is severe police brutality. And so Isaac just went with it,
So if it wasn't for having an independent, your own attorney,
right,
the government's attorney would have said, don't release this video.
Right, and they would have railroaded him right into a trial. They would have said, we did everything right, see what we did here. And once it came out, it was so obvious to them as well.
Bueno, ya se están aclarando las situaciones. Lo que pasa, voy a aclarar esto porque seguro que si yo me confundí, nuestros radioescuchas están todavía más confundidos. Desgraciadamente estos padres, y de veras que los admiro por su tenacidad y por su dureza, desgraciadamente estos padres han sufrido mucho en manos de la ley, que supuestamente está para defendernos, y de la policía, que supuestamente está para defendernos. El primer problema o encuentro que estos pobres padres tuvieron con la ley y la policía fue cuando a su hijo Isa lo detuvieron, lo abusaron, lo electrocutaron, y cuando se fue al juicio, pues como no tenían dinero, no podía agarrar un abogado privado. Todos los abogados por parte de la corte no lo estaban defendiendo. Le dijeron al joven que podía ver el video de cómo le habían pegado, cómo lo habían abusado, pero no podía tenerlo en su posición, mucho menos usarlo. Entonces no fue hasta que se comunicaron con el abogado Isaac, que ahora es el que los está defendiendo por su segundo hijo, que le dijo, vamos a ver cómo está esto. Y él fue el que los empezó a ayudar.
Susan, yeah.
I just wanted to add that in both this case with Isa and the case with Branch, we have a mutual friend activist who we met through the Andy Lopez activism, who is a nurse. And when she watches these videos, she says, we're trained to handle this without any of this brutality. We aren't given tasers. We aren't hitting people over the head with flashlights. We've been trained. Chris has been trained. And so the brutality never has to happen in the first place. You don't even have to get to the point where you're then in a situation of having to hide the video.
And you don't need 5 people with body armor.
Exactly.
La señora Susan, what's your last name?
Lamont.
Susan Lamont dijo que quería aclarar algo, que los papás de los jóvenes y ella tienen una amiga mutua que es una enfermera y que vio los 2 videos, el de su hijo Isa y el de su hijo Branch, y que dijo que desgraciadamente la policía abusa de su poder porque no tienen por qué estarle pegando a la gente con lámparas de mano, no los pueden estar electrocutando, no les pueden pegar de la manera que le pegan a la gente que detienen. Y ya cuando hacen eso, pues esconden los videos, esconden toda la evidencia, especialmente si la persona muere en sus manos.
Y a las personas que se les entrena por razones de medicina o de doctor, ellos tienen el entrenamiento de resolver estos problemas sin violencia. Entonces, si ellos lo pueden hacer, ¿por qué no lo puede hacer la policía?
Bueno, yo tengo una respuesta, pero no es mi entrevista.
Edgar, I'd like to say one thing on what Isaac had to say before he left, and that is about these people who are in elected office and they're not doing anything, and they're not standing up to the police. And this is not only true in Rohnert Park, it's true with the deputies in the Sheriff's Department and the Board of Supervisors. And I want to just say as an example of that, back when Efren Carrillo was on the Board of Supervisors before Linda Hopkins got there, I went before the Board of Supervisors with that photograph that I showed you earlier tonight, photograph of Issa being tasered in his private parts while he was being held down. Very clear image of that, and very obvious that that's what they're doing. And I went to them and I asked them if this was the type of thing that they thought should be going on in the jail that they supervise. And it was not long after the Abu Ghraib thing in Baghdad, where the American soldiers were torturing prisoners, and they didn't do anything nearly as bad as taser someone in the genitals. But that's what they did in the Sonoma County Jail. And when I showed that photograph to the Board of Supervisors and said, "Is this okay for this to go on in your jail?" they gave me the same blank look that they give everybody who comes to talk to them. And that was the end of it. So it is officially the case now, I guess, that you can be tasered in the genitals in Sonoma County Jail, and it's okay. And Randall Walker at the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department literally said that. He said there's nothing wrong with that. Don't go to the Sonoma County Jail.
Yeah.
Bueno, el papá del joven Isa, de los jóvenes Isa en Branch, dijo que quería aclarar algo, que él le estaba preguntando a los representantes si ellos aceptaban, si ellos toleraban
los
que el
supervisores
del condado, que si ellos aceptaban, que si ellos toleraban el abuso físico que se le da a las personas que ellos arrestan en las cárceles del condado. Y los supervisores nomás los veían con cara en blanco. Mientras que estaba pasando lo que estaba pasando con su hijo Isa, pasó un incidente en Bagdad que salió en todas las noticias, donde pues los soldados están abusando a los que tienen arrestados, que por la mayoría eran musulmanes, y que les preguntaron, ¿está bien hacer esto? Y que los vieron así con una cara en blanco, como diciendo, ¿qué quieres que hagamos? No es, últimamente no puedo hacer nada y no es mi problema. Entonces el papá dijo que en el condado de Sonoma es tolerado que a los jóvenes los electrocuten en los testículos. Y hizo un chiste así, diciendo que no es bueno que la persona caiga en manos de la policía en la cárcel de este condado.
We have to take a small break to listen to some messages from KBBF, and we're going to be right back with the Branch family. With the Roth family. Vamos a tomar un descanso para escuchar unos mensajes de KBBF y regresamos pronto.
Estás escuchando Informe KBBF.
Bienvenidos a escuchas, welcome back. Estamos en su programa Informe KBBF. We are back on your program Informe KBBF. Estamos hablando con los padres de Branch Roth. Branch fue un hombre que murió a las manos del Departamento de Policía de Rohnert Park. Desgraciadamente, la misma familia sufrió otro instante de violencia policíaca con su otro hijo, Isa, unos cuantos años antes. Ese incidente resultó en Isa en la cárcel del condado de Sonoma, fue abusado por la policía en esa situación. And I just realized something. We didn't end up saying what resulted from the Isa case. You guys pursued it. Lo que vamos a hablar ahora es qué decidió hacer la familia. Explicaron antes que por resultado del activismo sobre Andy López llegaron a conocer a un abogado. Entonces después de eso decidieron mover para demandar de parte de su hijo. So what did you decide to do once you met Isaac in terms of Isa?
Oh, well, we had met Isaac, as I said earlier, I think with the Justice Coalition for Andy Lopez in the Ramon Cairo trial, and he was a great lawyer. It was obvious during that trial that he knew what he was doing. So when we told Isa, you better get rid of your public defender because they're not doing any good for you, and it's just dragging on, and give Isaac a call, and things started to move very quickly once he got a good lawyer, and eventually he received a settlement in the federal court in San Francisco for $1.25 million, which was the largest settlement until up to that time for police brutality by Sonoma County law enforcement people.
Dijo que conocieron al abogado Isaac cuando el abogado estaba defendiendo a Ramón Cairo, que lo habían acusado injustamente, y como
que fue parte del
movimiento de la coalición de justicia que estaba organizándose por lo que le habían hecho a Andy López, que también murió en manos de la policía. Y de esa manera conocieron al abogado y empezó a defender a su hijo Isa. Eso fue antes de lo que le pasó a su hijo Branch. Y pues el juicio se movió muy rápido a partir de ese momento. Hicieron un arreglo en la Corte Federal en San Francisco, lo cual le otorgaron a su hijo Isa $1.5 millones, porque pues sí no lo reconocieron, pero él fue a su favor porque sí había sido abusado por la policía.
Y hasta ese tiempo fue la demanda más grande de la historia en el condado de Sonoma.
De Sonoma.
So we have this timeline that goes Isa and then Andy Lopez and then the settlement, right? And so in the midst of all this, you are involved in the Andy Lopez case. Tell us about, one of the, I guess, for transparency's sake, one of my reasons for being on the radio is to inspire people and to motivate people and politicize people. So I always want to know, how did people get politicized, Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you ended up with involved in Andy Lopez? Why was it important to you? Did you do activism before that? What was the context for all of this? For you getting involved in this? Mi pregunta es, como alguien que trabaja en la radio, una razón que trabaja en la radio es por querer saber cómo motivar a la gente para ser activos. Entonces me gusta saber las historias de otras personas y cómo ellos se motivaron. Entonces les voy a preguntar a la familia ¿por qué se involucraron con Andy López? ¿Cuáles fueron activistas antes de esos? ¿Qué fue la historia de eso?
I would say that I think we got involved because originally, the first thing in Sonoma County that kind of woke us up was Jeremiah Chaz over in Sebastopol, when he was being pretty much completely restrained by his father and another officer as I understand, in a van, flailing around. He accidentally kicked an officer who had just arrived, I guess in the face. The officer pulled his gun out, killed him. Claimed later that the reason he pulled his gun out and shot the boy was because he was afraid he was going to pass out and leave his officer alone with a deadly assailant.
He was 16 years old.
Yeah, so that is, as parents, that disturbed us. We thought, this could happen to any of our children. And then Andy killed, 13 years old. Mm-hmm. And on that, I would like to say it's established fact in all the cases that went out that when Eric Gilhoff and his partner stopped at the stoplight and first saw Andy Lopez and beeped the siren on the car, Andy turned and looked at them and then continued walking with his toy gun. So they knew they were looking at someone who was not concerned about the patrol car being there, beeping its siren, walking with a toy gun. Nevertheless, 17, 18 seconds later, Harry Gilhouse stepped out of the car and gunned him down with 8 bullets. So that was a clear murder that was never even really addressed by Jill Ravage. So that got us very infuriated, so we got involved.
Como escucharon, Edgar les preguntó qué es lo que los motivó a unirse al movimiento, y el señor empezó a explicar que en el condado de Sonoma ha habido muchos asesinatos, homicidios por parte de la policía. Empezó a hablar de un joven Jeremy Chase, que por accidente le pegó a un policía en la cara, y el policía simplemente sacó su pistola y mató al muchacho. El muchacho tenía 16 años. Después, la policía mató a Andy López, que era un jovencito de 12, 13 años, y pasó a explicar lo que muchos de nosotros ya sabemos, que cuando vieron a Andy López con su arma de juguete, le tocaron la sirena y se enojaron prácticamente porque Andy no se vio con miedo, y en menos de 18 segundos lo acribillaron a balazos. Y eso fue lo que motivó a estos padres a estar más activos, porque dijeron, si esto le está pasando a jovencitos, ¿cuál es lo que va a pasar después?
Marnie, did you want to say anything about that?
I just want to say that when Andy was killed, when he was murdered by Eric Gilhouse, we're parents of 6 children, and it just, to see Suhey and what she went through, his mother, I just always, it's indescribable. And now that we've gone through this, I so understood her pain and her suffering. It's indescribable. And that she got through it in some way. I don't think you ever get through it. Somehow you live with it. But they stayed with it, and they got a modicum of justice. That's all you ever get, is just a tiny bit of justice, really, and no accountability. And that's what we all need to keep working at, and as hard as we can, because they just refuse to address that.
And what you said, what tiny thing they did get, took 5 years of work to get.
Exactly.
La mamá de los jóvenes, Isa y Branch, dijo que ella se comprometió a trabajar en este movimiento cuando vio que Eric Cajas, el que asesinó a Andy López, no recibió ninguna consecuencia, y ella en ese momento sintió muy feo por la mamá de Andy, que cómo es que pudo ahora sí que sobrevivir tanto tiempo, los 5 años que se quedó en lucha, y después de lo que le hicieron a su hijo Branch, ahora ella entiende. Dice que uno nunca sobrevive eso, aprende a vivir uno con eso, pero es un dolor que no puede ni siquiera describir, y lo que más coraje le da es que en la corte, en la ley, entre los policías, nadie se responsabiliza, nadie sale con ningún castigo.
Quizás Susan pueda hablar de esto más, pero quería decir que personalmente quiero decir que la familia Roth trabajó tan duro por años después de que murió Andy López. Cada semana estuvieron en una protesta en la corte del condado de Sonoma. Es un compromiso que no se ve mucho en el mundo de activismo. And I was just saying, this is something that Susan will probably speak to more, but I personally wanted to let the audience know that the amount of work that the Roth family did for the Andy Lopez movement was something you don't see very often. The amount of commitment every single week going to a protest, even when it was just 2 or 3 people. You don't see that amount of commitment very often in activism, and it was very... it's a very inspiring kind of story, how hard this family worked for justice for the whole community. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't know if people know that about Chris and Marnie. I don't know if you want to say anything about that. Or...
Well, I would say that, they mentioned Jeremiah Chass, and there were quite a few killings in the county over many, many years, several decades, which brought the U.S. Human Rights Commission to the county to say things need to change, specifically with the county sheriff's office, with the city of Santa Rosa, and with the city of Rohnert Park. There were people.
When was that?
That was the report came out in 2000, May of 2000, actually 1 month before Andy was born.
Wow.
Was when that came out.
That was the Federal Human Rights Commission.
Yes. Civil rights, yes, sorry.
Civil rights or human
civil.
rights? Oh, civil,
yes, sorry.
Okay. La señora estaba explicando que Susan, que esto no es nuevo, que desgraciadamente después de lo que pasó a Jeremiah Chass, se hizo una investigación, especialmente aquí en el condado de Sonoma, y que hasta trajeron a una comisión de los derechos civiles, y que esto empezó federales, una delegación de los derechos civiles del gobierno federal, y que sacaron a relucir todos los abusos que ya existían por parte de la policía en el año del 2000, hace 19 años.
Yeah.
So then there were people locally working on that, but it was a small group, and so different people were killed. I remember being aware of each killing, but there was somehow not a mass mobilization until Andy was killed. And I don't know, I mean, certainly the fact that he was 13 was part of that. But Jeremiah Chass was 16. That's pretty young, too. Yeah. But something was there that triggered an uprising in the people, which then enabled this activism to take a form that it hadn't taken before.
La señora Susan estaba explicando que antes de que saliera a la luz el asesinato de Andy López, que ya había un grupo pequeño de gente que estaba trabajando para sacar a la luz pues el abuso de la policía, que ya el jovencito Jeremiah Chass había sido asesinado y que tenía 16 años, pero que ella no vio nada pasaba, pero que ella vio una movilización cuando Andy López fue asesinado. Claro que el niño tenía nada más 13 años, pero esta movilización no había empezado antes.
Just to speak to that, I've always wondered about that too, because there's certain murders that in Black Lives Matter movement, there's certain ones that are bigger than others, and you don't understand why. It's like maybe sometimes people are exhausted. Or something I wanted to mention that I personally saw firsthand that I've never seen before with Andy was that his peers self-organized over on the internet. Perhaps we were not at the technological place for that before, but it was the first time I have seen his peers, not activism, self-organize, and it took a week for the activists to get involved, but for that first week, it was just his peers. I think that's estaba diciendo, yo también me pregunto por qué algunas muertes la gente se moviliza y algunas no. Quizá a veces la gente está muy cansada ya de protestar, pero quería decir algo que yo me di cuenta en el caso de Andy, fue algo que nunca había visto antes, es que los jóvenes que fueron los estudiantes, los compañeros de Andy López, ellos mismos se autoorganizaron sin activistas y sin abogados para movilizarse, y por la primera semana fueron ellos que hicieron el movimiento. Después fue cuando los activistas se unieron a hacerlo más oficial, quizá darle más estructura, pero por la primera semana fue autoorganizado por sus compañeros.
So if I can make one more point, which will actually bring us back to Branch.
I want to talk about the jails too, but yeah.
Okay. There were, let's see, we did so much work. We went to years of meetings. We put pressure as constantly as we could. We got a modicum of movement, but a lot of people dropped out. And as you say, some people get tired. It's a huge commitment to make. Yeah. But the other thing is, in Sonoma County, if you are a Latino activist, you will get retaliation.
That's right.
And there is big-time retaliation. Ramon Cairo was one example, but there are others that I wouldn't even want to mention because I wouldn't want to endanger people.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of it. So those people, they have to drop out. Yeah, because they're targeted in this county. So the result has been that Sonoma County's minimal progress is now being undone, actively being undone by the Board of Supervisors and the new director of the review organization, IOLERO. Same thing has happened in the city of Santa Rosa, that they heard from the auditor something they didn't like, so they fired him. That was that.
Yeah.
And Rohnert Park has never agreed to discuss any change whatsoever, and still won't. 20 years.
When you say, before I just want to clarify, when you say that there's this retaliation, you know this from first-hand knowledge.
Well, people telling me what's happening. I mean, we all saw what happened to Ramon and Louis, and there were quite a few people, but there's also people
who you won't say, but
I won't say. I can't say their names because I wouldn't want to make it worse.
Because the average person out there might be like, "Oh yeah, well, where's the proof?"
Well, right,
you
and you can't,
and
you can't. Right. You can't say that. You can't endanger people.
I gotta just say, God bless you, Louis. If Louis is listening to this, God bless you. He was, they tore after him just for being an activist. I love the man.
Yeah.
La señora Susan estaba hablando acerca de la organización que se empezó a dar por parte de de estos asesinatos por parte de la policía. Y dijo que al principio hace unos 20 años más o menos, había mucha gente trabajando, que tenían años de juntas y la gente se fue retirando poco a poco, pero algo que ella ha visto durante todo este proceso es de que sí, la gente latina participa en estos movimientos, junto con los blancos. A los blancos no lo dijo, pero eso fue lo que se dio a entender. A los blancos quizás no les pase nada, pero a los latinos hay una venganza por parte de la ley, por parte de la policía, de las cortes, y los empiezan a perseguir. Y hablaron otra vez de Ramón Cairo y dijo que pues en el condado de Sonoma esto se ve muy claramente, tanto la mesa de los directores como todos los que están en el gobierno se lavan las manos, no quieren hacer nada, y dijo que hay muchos latinos que han sido perseguidos por la policía, pero que no quiere decir sus nombres para no arriesgar su vida, ¿verdad? Porque pues desgraciadamente sí ha habido represalias en contra de ellos.
There's so much that happened during Andy Lopez's time. The protests, the task force that was set up that so many of the recommendations that probably have just gone off into the ether. We have no idea how many were implemented, what was done.
3 out of 22, I think.
Yeah. But the other thing I want to note is when the park finally came to be, that was one of the things that did come out, the positive things that came out of this tragedy, this killing. I want to say there was a concerted effort by officials, and sometimes it was subtle, sometimes overt, but the community came to these meetings to work on building this park, and the youth came, and they, over and over again, the county was going to call this Moreland Neighborhood Park, but the community wasn't going to have it. This was Andy's park, and I know it's not a lot was given to them, but this was the community saying, no, this is Andy's Unity Park, and they did not want that. The sheriff didn't want it, and the board didn't want it, but it finally came to be that it was going to be Andy's Unity Park, and I think that was a victory, small as it is.
La mamá de el joven Branch dijo que siguió hablando acerca de todo lo que pasó cuando se le asesinó a Andy, y dijo que el grupo de apoyo a Andy, a su familia, en contra de la policía, creció de una manera increíble, que se hicieron juntas, que se hicieron demandas y que salieron muchas demandas, y de todas las demandas que salieron, ella se pregunta a sí misma cuántas fueron aprobadas, y su amiga Susan le dijo que nada más 3 de más de 23, y que cada vez que iban a la junta con la policía, con el gobierno local, ellos trataban de cualquier manera de no llamar el parque que se hizo con el nombre de Andy, porque eso hubiera sido un reconocimiento de los errores que ellos hicieron.
And what they always want to say, what the supervisors want to say, is that the park is something for healing the community, and so they want to skirt what really needs to happen. Right. And Suhei, Andy's mother, has been very, very clear that park was deserved, but it is nothing about healing.
And that's not what she asked for.
Right. Yeah. That's
great for the community, but that's not what she asked for.
Yeah, exactly.
Dice la señora Susan que el parque, según los directores de la mesa del condado de Sonoma, de los supervisores, decían que el parque era para sanar todas las penas por las que la mamá de Andy había pasado, para sanar emocionalmente, pero la señora dice que no es así, que el parque no representa ni va a sanar todo el dolor que ella tuvo. ¿Por qué no nos enfocamos de regreso a Branch?
Really quickly, I think this is very important to say, we're going to talk about Branch again, but, sorry, were you going to say something, Mary?
I just wanted to say we've been talking about oversight or lack of oversight, and that Branch, to get back to Branch too, is, I believe that Branch is the direct recipient of not having oversight in Roanoke Park for 20 years. The community asking for it, begging for it, demanding it, and they refused to do it. And Branch was the recipient of that lack of oversight, unfortunately.
So the reason that we spoke about Branch in the opening part of the segment was because of the time constraints of Isaac. I wanted to talk to you about, we talked about you didn't want to see the video, which is completely understandable, completely makes sense. It's not very often that somebody, well, I guess I shouldn't say that. Perhaps that's inaccurate. But we have a unique situation where Marty, you talked about, you can't imagine what Suhei was going through, and then you experienced it. What was it like to deal with the emotions and the hard work you put into Andy Lopez, and then get some phone call? I mean, was it different than if you hadn't been an activist? Was it more infuriating because you were an activist? What can you tell us about that experience? It's kind of a unique experience.
Right. I don't think that I really put that together.
Yeah.
Like how could this be happening to us?
Right,
It was not lost on us, but it was such a shock. And just briefly, I want to say, when we found out Branch died, our family had gathered at our youngest son's home that night because the next day he was graduating college.
Your youngest son?
Our youngest son. And so it was just so surreal, and we just couldn't believe it. It took a long time for us to really absorb that, and then of course go back to what we know of what's happened with Andy and his family, what they went through.
Mi pregunta fue que tenemos una situación única en la cual alguien que está trabajando para apoyar a una familia que perdió un familiar, ellos mismos sufren la misma situación. Entonces le pregunté cuál fue la experiencia personal de recibir esa llamada que había muerto su hijo, ellos siendo parte del movimiento de Andy López.
La señora explicó que fue algo demasiado no real cuando la policía asesinó a su hijo Branch una noche antes. Estaban todos en la casa de su hijo, el más joven, que ya se iba a graduar de la universidad, y después de lo que le pasó a su hijo, que murió en las manos de la policía, les recuerdo que es al joven al cual le pegaron fuertemente, lo tiraron al suelo boca abajo, le pusieron cuerpos encima, las rodillas, le pegaron con lámparas de mano, le electrocutaron. Dijo que a partir de ese momento su realidad cambió de una manera increíble, y que qué interesante que, siendo que ellos estaban activos en el caso de Andy López, les pasa a ellos lo mismo.
Did you want to say something, Chris?
Well, I just want to say that I differ from Susan and Marnie in accountability oversight issue, because I don't think it's possible. My experience with Andy Lopez, the whole picket line, I don't see any possible way that the politicians in Sonoma County are going to stand up to the police, whether it be the sheriff's deputies or Rohnert Park. So I just want to say that I feel that accountability oversight is a waste of time. We have to learn to police ourselves, and we have to do it without government, because all they do is protect the police, who are just basically a gang of thugs in the poor neighborhoods in this county.
El papá de Branch, el señor Chris, dice que quiere él aclarar que él no tiene aspiraciones de que los políticos vayan a hacer algo, a confrontar a la policía, porque pues en verdad todos son lo mismo y no les conviene, y que la policía no es nada más que un grupo de mafiosos que siempre está aterrorizando a la gente en los barrios pobres.
I could give you an interesting example of that. Was that we had one settlement conference with Rohnert Park, only one, and we told them that what we wanted was change, not just a payout. Because we know what they do; they just pay you off.
Yeah.
They can't bring back your loved one. They're not going to do anything to hold the police accountable. So we said to them at the settlement conference, when we were there under oath with the federal judge, we said, that's what we want, is change. And if you make all the changes, at one point I even said, if you make all the changes that we want and have a really good police force, we'll take $1. And as a result of partly of that, the judge was very interested and said, what kind of changes do you want? And our attorney, John Scott, sat down with a pencil and paper, and in about 5 minutes, we wrote up the changes that we wanted to see at Rohnert Park, and then the judge took those changes and the information about our settlement to those people from Rohnert Park. And that was the last we ever heard of it. They have never offered a single change, and they have done nothing but deny any wrongdoing and say that everything that they did was correct all along. So you can tell the people of Rohnert Park that instead of paying out $4 million, they could have paid out $1.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to mention is we're broke, and we're going to be broke for at least 2 years because they're going to push it through the courts for 2 years.
Yeah.
But and they're never going to change.
I can do it since you were outside the room. Chris explicó una historia que estaba pasando durante los procedimientos de Branch, que en las negociaciones con la ciudad de Rohnert Park, con el departamento de policía de Rohnert Park. Just to be clear, on paper, what body was it Rohnert Park Police Department?
Right. Well, what John was requesting that they do was agree to have a designated person. I won't name them, but there was a local police respected police chief oversee reform in the Rohnert Park Department under a contract that would be supervised by a federal judge. So it'll be monitored by a federal judge to see to it that the reforms actually took place. They're not interested.
That sounds very reasonable, by the way. Estaba explicando que en negociaciones en la corte, la familia Roth ofreció que en lugar de pagarle por el sufrimiento a la familia, si querían, nada más podían pagar $1, pero que por el intercambio sería que el departamento de policía de Rohnert Park hiciera cambios para rendir cuentas, para que los policías puedan tener más review, oversight.
Que tuvieran más revisión, que hubiera reformas, y el abogado se sentó y escribió sus peticiones una por una, se las entregaron al juez. El juez dijo muchas gracias, lo voy a revisar, vamos a hacer las reformas, y jamás volvieron a escuchar de él.
Entonces quería que la gente de Rohnert Park supiera que el departamento de policía prefirió dar $4 millones a la familia en lugar de hacer unos cambios básicos a sus procedimientos.
Pero ellos, los padres también aclararon que no es nada más de ya ganamos los 4 millones. Están diciendo que van a tener que seguir peleando por quizás 2 años más, y que de verdad están ya bien pobres porque se han gastado todo su dinero, porque la policía va a seguir peleando en no pagarles los 4 millones.
Something that I am not clear on is you talked about Issa, and you talked about how the police thought they could exonerate themselves by videoing themselves somehow. What's the story behind Branch's video? Quería saber, en el ejemplo del primer hijo que sufrió Issa, nos explicaron que la razón que el video salió fue porque la policía, según, se iba a defender con el video, y resultó que se hicieron hacer mal. ¿Cuál es la historia de cómo salió a la luz este video de Branch, el otro hijo?
Yeah, maybe Susan saw that video. All I know about that video is that it's absolutely horrible. And the first time Isaac saw it, he said, "You should never look at this. No parent should ever look at that kind of brutality against their son." And I did read the audio transcript from the body cameras, and that was enough to tell me that Isaac was right. I should not see that kind of brutality against Branch, and so I haven't really seen the video.
Dijo el señor que no clarificó cómo es que llegaron.
No está seguro, pero
no quizás está seguro. Que Susan nos va a decir a nuestra audiencia, pero dijo que ellos decidieron no ver el video porque es algo horrible, que ningún padre debe de ser sujeto a ese abuso, que el papá nada más escuchó el audio. Escuchó el audio, y que dijo que eso
You didn't hear the audio. audio. You read the
You
transcript.
did.
Read the transcript.
Que leyó lo que había pasado y dijo que eso fue simplemente lo suficiente para saber cómo habían sido abusados, y dijo que Susan nos va a explicar cómo es que llegaron a ese video.
Well, I don't know in terms of anything like with they trying to exonerate themselves when that, I can't speak to that. Something that Isaac didn't mention is that this case turned on 2 minutes of that video. That's really all that the case was about. The point at which Branch said, "I can't breathe," they ignored it, and he died. But the video shows the very first encounter. It goes through the whole thing. Now, what happened leading up to those 2 minutes is not part of the case.
Right.
But when you watch it, it's clear that none of it had to happen.
Yeah.
So the officer comes into the room, and Branch is he can answer questions pretty well, but he's afraid of his pants. He's sure they're poisoned by detergent. So
He's not in a healthy mental space.
he's not, but he's not combative
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form. And the police officer starts out very calmly. He's very condescending.
You don't say.
Yeah, calling him partner all the time. It was really repulsive. But he's giving Branch instructions, and put on your pants, and Branch can't do it because they're poison.
Yeah.
And at one point, Branch says, "Well, I'll take the sheet and I'll wrap the sheet around me." And the officer says, "No, I can't let you do that." And you want to say, why not?
Yeah.
When I start to tell this story to people, before I say, he can't put on his pants, and they're making him put on his pants. Everybody says to me, "Well, why didn't they let him use a towel? Why didn't they let him use a sheet?"
Yeah.
This might have been completely avoided. Okay, yeah, translate.
Tengo que traducir porque tiene muchos detalles. La señora nos empezó a explicar que el video es como de 28, 25 minutos, pero lo que entró a la corte fueron nada más 2 minutos del video, en la que Branch le está diciendo muchas veces a los policías que no puede respirar porque está boca abajo, y lo ignoran y le dicen que sí puede respirar. Pero pasó a narrar toda la parte del video, cómo es que los policías llegaron al cuarto del muchacho y le dijeron que se tenía que vestir porque se lo iban a llevar, y sus pantalones, parece ser que no se quería poner los pantalones porque estaban infectados o contaminados por un jabón, y tenía el muchacho miedo de ponerse los pantalones, y es ahí a donde empezó la discusión más alta. El muchacho les decía que si se podía envolver en una sábana, y el policía estaba necio en que no, que se tenía que poner el pantalón, y el policía lo estaba...
Disculpe, claramente estaba en un estado mental que no era estable, porque él tenía miedo de los pantalones por una razón que es personal para él. Tenía un estado mental de emergencia. Entonces, lo que quería decir, muy importante, Susan, es que la solución obvia es para dejarle ponerse otra cosa, y le dijeron que no.
Que le dijeron que no, y al principio cuando el policía llegó lo estaba tratando de una manera muy condescendiente y le estaba hablando bien, pero conforme el altercado subía de volumen, el policía se irritaba más y más en contra del joven.
And he asks to speak to someone else. He says, "I just need to talk to someone." And all you had to do was sit there with him.
Yeah.
You know, it would have taken longer. So what?
Right.
It was like, okay, I give you 10 minutes. That's it. And now we're gonna take you in.
Right.
And he's clearly terrified. He says, "Don't kill me." And he tries to run away. And they jump all over him, and they tase him, and they beat him, and you know we heard all that. And as Isaac says, how many times he said, "Help and help me," and you sit there, you're just stunned that anybody would do this. And in the courtroom, all 5 officers were asked, "Would you do this the same way again?" And each one said yes.
La señora continuó con la narración acerca de lo que pasó con el joven Branch y dijo que Branch les pedía que por favor le dejaran hablar con alguien, porque tenía mucho miedo de que lo fueran a lastimar, de que lo fueran a matar, además de que él ya estaba con mucho miedo acerca de los pantalones que los policías querían que se pusiera y él no, porque estaban infectados de algo. Y el muchacho se espantó tanto que quiso echarse a correr, y fue cuando los 5 policías lo agarraron y lo empezaron a atacar. Y dice que lo que más le duele es que en la corte le preguntaron a los policías que si volverían a hacer lo mismo, y los policías contestaron que sí, que iban a volver a hacer lo mismo, aunque costara la vida de un joven que ya del principio tenía mucho miedo de ellos.
I want to say, too, that what could that day have looked like if just one of those officers out of 5, just one had said, "Stop. Let's stop," or let's take a moment here. Also on the stand, the officers were asked who was in charge. Each one, as they're testifying, who's in charge? There was nobody in charge. They didn't know. Nobody was in charge. They were all in charge, kind of in charge. We don't know. Or one officer kind of had a little bit more authority. I think that was Worley. But it just went nowhere. It was this big pile-on, and nobody stopped. No one could stop anyone else, it seemed, until he died. And then they were just shocked, I guess. They were like, oh, surprised.
La mamá del joven Branch dijo que quizás a ella le hubiera gustado saber, oír o hasta fantasear que hubiera uno de esos 5 policías que les dijera a los demás: alto, vamos a pensar qué está pasando aquí, qué estamos haciendo, pero nadie se detuvo. Y ya después en la corte les preguntaron quién era la persona de los policías, de los 5 policías que estaba a cargo, y nadie podía responder la pregunta quién estaba a cargo. Al final de cuentas todos estaban a cargo y ninguno. Y ya después, cuando vieron lo que había pasado, se sorprendieron.
I think I do want to, at some point, if you could speak to the jail beatings and behavior there, because I do think it all plays on each other. All the departments, everybody knows what everybody's doing and how they're behaving, and it's a culture. You can see that just spreads, and it's an ugly culture.
I just wanted to point out something. Just one of the many kind of infuriating things about police brutality cases that happen is the idea that when people are confronted with police violence, they are expected to be calm, but the same expectation is not given to police. Not only that, this is somebody whose family member went through what they went through, and they're having an obvious mental lapse of some sort, and they are expected to remain perfectly calm and rational, while the police are not expected to do so, the ones who have the guns and the protection. And nada más quería decir algo que da mucho coraje, es que cuando las personas están enfrentadas por violencia de la policía, se dice que ellos tuvieran que haber quedado mantenerse con calma, pero no se le dice lo mismo a la policía. especialmente a esta persona, quien su hermano sufrió lo que sufrió a las manos de la policía y estaba en un crisis de salud mental, y como quiera se le según tienen la expectativa que se mantenga con calma ante la policía. So yeah, you mentioned the jails. As it turns out, our friend Isaac was involved in another lawsuit. Now that we're talking about how Isa, what happened to him, that actually, I don't know if we mentioned, that happened while he was being processed in jail, booked in jail. Susan, why don't you talk about this case that has to do with Sonoma County jails?
Well, it was a case, I think it was 21 inmates. One inmate had been put on medication, which made him sleepy, and he didn't respond when an officer knocked on the door, and they started to yell at him and verbally abuse him, and went in and roughed him up. And so we have all these inmates, and they're all individually in their own cells. Nobody can do anything with anybody else. All they can do is shout. So they start shouting to stop this. And over the next 5 hours, they are taken out one by one and taken out for what is called yard counseling, where they are put in pain compliance holds in positions so that they're in pain. And then they bring them back and they pick up someone else. And they did this repeatedly for 5 hours. Some of it's video, not all of it. And so they all wrote letters to their various attorneys, which then went to Isaac. And I think there ended up being 3 or 4 plaintiffs. I'm not sure the exact number, because you can't be a plaintiff while you're in the jail. You have to have been freed. You have to have been released to be a plaintiff. So,
wait,
yeah,
what?
Yes. So that
that's new for me.
Anyway, that became a case, and that ended up being settled. And I think it was also something like $1.25 million, something like that. But it was settled for them. Yeah, and now, so Sheriff Essick has said he has ended yard counseling. The thing is, I don't happen to trust any sheriff.
Yeah.
We already know that back when Freitas was sheriff, he said he was going to reduce his cooperation with ICE. He said he had.
Yeah.
North Bay Organizing Project got involved, and supposedly this big victory, Freitas had agreed to do this, and it turned out he was lying. He hadn't.
Right. So we have no reason to believe that.
Until somebody says something, if there were a case or somebody comes out and said, yeah, I got yard counseled, we don't have anything to go on. We have no idea whether Essick is telling the truth or not.
Mi pregunta fue que nos platicara un poco de otro caso en cual está trabajando el abogado Isaac. Y es su respuesta.
Y bueno, ella nos platicó de un caso, no nos dio la fecha, en el que en la cárcel, it was here in Sonoma County, ¿verdad? En la cárcel de aquí de Sonoma County, del condado de Sonoma, eran 21 prisioneros. Y los policías llegaban a tocarles a la puerta para que se alistaran para sacarlos o para que pasaran la lista. A uno de esos prisioneros lo tenían con una medicación bien fuerte, con una medicina bien fuerte que lo ponía a dormir. Y los policías le empezaron a tocar, le empezaron a gritar, y como castigo, y los demás presos empezaron a gritar todos espantados, y como castigo a los prisioneros, la policía los empezó a abusar al sacarlos por 5 horas seguidas a lo que ellos le llaman la consejería del patio, o el cumplimiento con el dolor, y que cuando los sacan a uno por uno, pues pues es nada más para torturarlos, para pegarles, para maltratarlos. Y ya cuando los regresaron a todos, pues ellos, los mismos prisioneros, empezaron a escribirle a sus abogados, a hablarle a sus abogados, a contarles lo que les había pasado, y el abogado Isaac metió una demanda con unos 2 o 3 de ellos, pero nos estaba explicando la señora Susan que desgraciadamente una persona no puede llevar una demanda si todavía está encarcelada. Puede llevar la demanda siempre y cuando ya haya salido de la cárcel. Y bueno, les pagaron a los que fueron abusados de una manera horrible $1.25 million, y la señora estaba diciendo que el sheriff prometió que iba a cambiar todo, que ya no iba a ser lo mismo, pero al final de cuentas nada más prometen y no hacen ningún cambio.
We're running out of time. I know that one thing we wanted to accomplish tonight, which I think is personally very important, is to share some information which is already public information, which is to let people know the names of the Rohnert Park police officers who were involved in the death of Branch. This is public information, so, we're just sharing it again. And I think it's very important for our audience to hear this, especially if you live in Rohnert Park. Se nos está acabando el tiempo.
Yeah.
Yo sé algo que quería asegurarme que compartiéramos es una pieza de información que ya es pública, pero que es importante compartirla con la comunidad. Los nombres de los oficiales del departamento de Rohnert Park que fueron involucrados en la muerte de Branch.
Right. Well, thank you, Edgar, and that's very important. We don't have any oversight. We don't have any accountability. So the only oversight or accountability possible, really, that I know of that we can do ourselves is to name the names of the individual officers who were involved in this killing. And hopefully they will... well, anyway.
Nada más está diciendo que es el único forma de rendir cuentas es para la comunidad que sepa esta información. Go ahead.
The officer who arrived first was David Watson, an officer in Rohnert Park Public Service, and he was an initial lead person, and in my view, he was the one who really was responsible because he did not step back and do the right thing. He initiated the entire encounter. The second person to arrive there was Officer Sean Hewitt, H-U-O-T, and the other officers involved were Sean's brother Matt Hewitt, Mike Worley, and Eric Matson. And what I would say about all of those fellows is certainly, as I've already said, none of them were heroes, and in my view, none of them were police officers, at least not legitimate police officers. And, yes, they committed a homicide.
And there were more than actually 5 officers in the room. There were the officers, there were EMTs, there were security guards. The room was filled with people.
No nada más fueron agentes de la policía, pero también asistencia médica y seguridad y muchas cosas. Podemos leer solamente los nombres una vez más. Can we hear the names by themselves one more time?
Los voy a leer yo, pero por supuesto que están en inglés. Los 5 policías fueron el señor David Watson, que fue el primero que llegó, el que se le considera el líder, el responsable de iniciar toda la violencia. Después llegó otro policía, Sean Hewitt, seguido por otro policía con el mismo apellido, Matt Hewitt. Después llegó Mike Worley y al final Eric Metzen, y los 5 policías ya para ese momento están golpeando y brutalizando al joven Branch Roth. Y la señora Susan aclaró que ya después no nada más los policías estaban en el cuarto, sino que el cuarto se llenó de una cantidad increíble de gente por parte de la corte, de la burocracia, como doctores, enfermeros, todos los que estaban ahí con ellos.
We are out of time, but I want to very profoundly thank the Roth family, as well as Susan and Isaac and Professor Larque for helping us do this. We wouldn't be possible without everyone's participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to just say KBBF is the only media outlet that I know of in Sonoma County that has addressed the issue of police brutality for decades. Nobody else wants to talk about it, look at it. So thank you very, very much for having us on, and God bless you and Alfredo and Alicia, and God bless everybody here at KBBF.
Thank you very
Love
much.
you guys.
Likewise.
El señor Chris acaba de decir que él le agradece mucho a KBBF porque KBBF es la única estación que de veras publica y habla abiertamente de la brutalidad policíaca, y que ninguna otra estación de radio en este condado quiere hablar acerca de esto, y de veras que él está muy agradecido pues con todos los que trabajan aquí en la radio y con la radio en general por estar sacando al aire todos estos problemas que vienen por parte de la policía.
Muchísimas gracias a la familia Roth, a Susan, Isaac y la profesora Larque por hacer este programa posible. Gracias a todos. Nos vemos la siguiente vez.